I caught her red-handed at 6:34 in the morning, standing in my garage holding my cordless drill like it belonged to her. Her name's Cheryl. Cheryl Lancaster. President of the Willow Creek HOA for the past 5 miserable years. She wears those oversized sunglasses even when it's cloudy and thinks her clipboard gives her legal authority. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. I'm Wade Whitmore, and I'm not the kind of guy who causes trouble, but I sure as hell finish it when it comes knocking on my door uninvited. Or in this case, breaking into my garage. It started a few weeks ago when I noticed my socket wrench set was missing. At first I figured I misplaced it, then my power sander vanished, then my entire red tool chest gone. I live alone and don't loan out tools, and the kicker, no sign of forced entry. That's when I realized someone had found the spare key I used to keep under the flower pot beside the back gate. I changed the locks immediately and installed 2 motion-activated cameras. One pointed to the side gate and the other inside the garage, high up where nobody'd notice. Sure enough, at the crack of dawn on a Tuesday, Cheryl strolled in like she owned the place. The side gate creaked. The camera caught her sliding a key into the old lock which I'd already replaced, and then pausing in shock when the door didn't open. She pulled a screwdriver out of her tote bag, fiddled with the latch for almost 5 minutes, then walked around to the garage. She didn't notice the camera above her head as she punched in a code on a keypad that no longer worked. That's when I stepped out from the shadows. "What the hell do you think you're doing in my garage, Cheryl?" she froze. "Mr. Whitmore, this is HOA business. You're storing unauthorized equipment in a residential zone." "My tools." "Your garage has been reported multiple times for noise violations." "We have the right to inspect for compliance." By breaking in and stealing from me, she tried to brush past me, still clutching my drill. "I don't have time for this. I'll be filing a report." "Good." "So will I." I yanked open the door and let her walk out, but not before I grabbed my drill from her hand. She didn't resist, just glared at me like I'd insulted her ancestors. I called the police that same morning. Officer Ramirez showed up within the hour. I handed over the footage, the list of stolen items, and a printed record of the dates I'd noticed them missing. "You're telling me the HOA president used a key to enter your garage and took your tools?" he asked, not telling, showing. I played him the video. Ramirez's eyebrows went up. "Well, damn." She was still outside when the cruiser pulled up, clipboard in hand, trying to talk to my neighbor about his front lawn. She turned, saw Ramirez, and immediately turned back like she didn't notice, but he walked right up to her. "Cheryl Lancaster." "Yes. I need you to come with me and answer a few questions about a burglary report." "This is outrageous. I'm the HOA president. You can't. I can, and I will. Please come with me." She tried to argue, something about bylaws and community standards. Ramirez wasn't having it. I stood on my driveway, arms crossed, watching her get into the back of the cruiser, still ranting about neighborhood integrity. That was the first time she got caught, and believe me, it wasn't going to be the last. I didn't expect Cheryl to be back in the neighborhood that afternoon, but there she was, marching up the sidewalk like nothing had happened, her posture stiff as steel rebar. Officer Ramirez had only taken her in for questioning, not arrested her yet. But he said the footage was more than enough for the department to open an investigation. By the time the sun set, I had already sent a letter to the HOA's legal contact listed on their website. Certified mail. No threats, just a detailed account of what had happened, a copy of the video footage, and a polite request for a full inventory of HOA-owned equipment. I knew they didn't have anything close to what she'd taken from me. Around 7 that evening, I caught my neighbor Terry out front trimming her hedges. She looked up when I walked over. "You heard what happened?" I asked. She nodded. "Cheryl says you staged it." I leaned against the fence. "Staged it? How do you stage someone walking into your garage with a stolen key and trying to walk off with your power tools?" She said you lured her into your garage as a trap. Something about you trying to intimidate her. That's rich. People are talking, Wade. Some folks don't believe her, but others. You know how it is around here. I did. Cheryl had been manipulating the board for years. She knew who to flatter, who to threaten, and who to ignore. The board itself was a joke, three people who never showed up to meetings unless there was wine and cheese, so I decided to change the narrative. The next morning, I visited the county clerk's office and requested the public filings for Willow Creek HOA. I wanted to know when Cheryl had been elected, what her legal responsibilities were, and most importantly, if she had the authority to enter private properties without consent. What I found sent me down a rabbit hole. 3 annual meeting minutes were missing from the file. Not redacted, just gone. No record of officer elections for the past 3 years. I asked the clerk, a woman named Dana, if that was normal. Not unless they're hiding something, she said. HOAs are required to submit those to maintain their registration. Who's supposed to enforce that? Usually the Community Development Office, but they're swamped. If you want someone to look into it, your best bet is the State Ombudsman's Office. They handle HOA oversight. 30 minutes later, I was filing a formal complaint with the state. While I waited for the wheels to start turning, I decided to keep digging. I visited 3 neighbors I trusted: Ron, a retired plumber; Evelyn, a widow who'd lived here since the subdivision was built; and Malik, a nurse who worked nights and hated the HOA more than I did. I asked them one question. Have you ever had anything go missing from your property? Ron rubbed his jaw. My leaf blower disappeared last fall. I thought one of my grandkids took it, but now. Evelyn's eyes widened. My garden shears and a bird bath ornament, I didn't think much of it. Figured it was kids. Malik didn't hesitate. My pressure washer, gone last month. We made a list. 9 items, each valuable, and each one had vanished in the last year. That weekend, the HOA held one of their community enrichment events, a pancake breakfast in the park. Cheryl was there, acting like her usual self, clipboard in hand, barking at a volunteer who hadn't set up the napkins right. I showed up with a large envelope and walked right up to her. "You're not allowed to be here," she said without looking at me. "I'm a dues-paying resident." "I'm allowed anywhere on public HOA property." "You're disrupting the event. I'm delivering evidence. There's a difference." I handed her the envelope. Inside are signed statements from 3 neighbors detailing items stolen from their properties. The police have copies. So does the state ombudsman. I suggest you read it carefully. She didn't take the envelope, just glared at me like I'd tracked mud across her marble foyer. I let it drop on the table in front of her and walked away. By Monday, things escalated. 2 plainclothes detectives visited me in the afternoon, Detective Farley and Detective Nguyen. They were following up on the open theft investigation. I invited them in, showed them the updated camera logs, and gave them a list of all the items that had gone missing from other homes. Farley asked questions quietly while Nguyen took notes like her pen was running out of ink. "Any idea where the stolen tools might be now?" Farley asked. "I have a theory." I pointed toward the community maintenance shed, tucked behind the tennis courts. "She runs the HOA like a fiefdom. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the stolen gear ended up there." "You have access?" "No, but I know someone who might." Malik had a friend who used to be on the landscaping crew. Said the HOA kept all their maintenance equipment in that shed, but the inventory was never monitored. They had no check-in system, no record of what was purchased or replaced. 2 days later, the detectives got a warrant, and when they opened that shed, half my missing tools were inside. My socket wrench set, my orbital sander, and even the red toolbox still with my engraved initials on the side. Not just my stuff either. Ron's leaf blower, Evelyn's garden shears, and what looked like an entire collection of power tools far beyond what an HOA would need for trimming bushes and cleaning gutters. Farley called me that night. "You were right. We found over 30 items with identifying marks. We're cataloging everything. This might go beyond simple theft." "How so?" "There's evidence some of the equipment was loaned out to contractors. We found a ledger. If Cheryl was personally profiting from this, it could turn into a fraud case." That's when I realized this wasn't just about me. She'd built an operation stealing tools, storing them in a shed paid for by the HOA, then renting them out to local contractors under the table. The money, probably pocketed. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. Normally, they were sleepy affairs with maybe 5 attendees. That night, over 40 residents packed into the rec center. Cheryl looked pale. No sunglasses, no clipboard, just a stack of papers she barely glanced at. I stood up during the open comment period. My name is Wade Whitmore. I filed a police report 2 weeks ago after discovering the HOA president had entered my garage without permission and removed personal property. That investigation led to the discovery of stolen items linked to multiple homes in this neighborhood. Someone gasped. Cheryl looked ready to faint. I have here, I held up a folder, the police report, the inventory recovered from the maintenance shed, and sworn statements from residents whose property was found there. I'm also submitting a petition to remove Cheryl Lancaster as HOA president, effective immediately. The room erupted. Not in chaos, but in applause. Malik stood up next, then Terry. Then Evelyn, who hadn't spoken at a meeting in over a decade. The board had no choice but to call an emergency vote, and for the first time in 5 years, Cheryl didn't have the numbers. She stepped down before the meeting ended. Left the building without a word, her heels clacking like gunshots on the tile. As soon as the door closed behind her, someone from the back called out, "Check her house. Bet she's got half of Home Depot in her garage." Laughter broke the tension, but the work was just beginning. We still had to elect a new board, untangle the mess she'd made with the finances, and figure out how long this had been going on. But for the first time in years, there was real hope in Willow Creek. And Cheryl. She had a new set of keys issued by the county jail. 2 weeks after Cheryl's resignation, things took a sharp, unexpected turn. It started when I received a thick envelope in the mail from the county prosecutor's office. Inside were a subpoena and a formal notice. I'd been listed as a primary witness in a criminal fraud investigation tied to Willow Creek's HOA. The document referenced a statute I didn't recognize, so I spent the next hour deep in online legal code. Turns out, the charges weren't limited to petty theft. The state was pursuing felony-level fraud, embezzlement, and unlawful property entry. Cheryl had apparently been funneling HOA funds into a shell landscaping company that billed inflated invoices for non-existent work. According to the paperwork, she'd been doing it for at least 4 years. The kicker: the stolen tools were listed as leased equipment in those fake invoices, double-dipping, stealing them from residents, then pretending the HOA rented them from her company at a markup. I called Ramirez, who was now working with the county's Special Investigations Unit. "I take it you saw the subpoena," he said. "I did. How deep is this?" "There's a forensic audit underway." So far, it looks like over $28,000 in HOA funds were siphoned off through false maintenance charges. That's ignoring the stolen property. Any chance she had help? We're looking at 2 of the board members. One of them co-signed the checks. The other approved the vendor contracts without question. Think they knew? Hard to say. One of them's already hired a lawyer. That usually speaks volumes. I hung up and sat back, running my hand over my face. What started as a missing wrench had uncovered a whole operation. I glanced at the folder on my table, the one with the petition, evidence photos, and police documentation. It felt heavier now, like it bore the weight of something far more toxic than a power-hungry neighbor. That night, I met up with Malik and Evelyn at the community center, now temporarily serving as the headquarters for a newly formed HOA reform committee. A dozen folding chairs were set up in a circle, with a dry erase board covered in bullet points and question marks. A few more residents trickled in, some carrying notepads, others just looking tired. Malik leaned in as I sat down. "You see the news yet?" "No, what happened?" "Cheryl's house got raided this morning. Unmarked vans, boxes coming out the front door." "Looked like something off a show." Evelyn nodded slowly. They carried out her computer tower, a couple of locked filing drawers, and what looked like contractor invoices. A man I didn't recognize spoke up from the corner. "I'm Todd. Used to be on the finance subcommittee about 6 years ago." Cheryl forced me off after I questioned why we were paying for monthly equipment sanitization services. That was back when we didn't even have a community pool yet. He pulled out a flash drive. "I've got copies of the last legitimate budget reports before things went sideways. Might help whoever's digging through the mess." I took the drive and passed it to Malik. "We'll get that to the auditors. Everything helps." Todd shifted in his seat. She buried anyone who challenged her. I had no idea she was running a whole side hustle. No one did. That was the terrifying part. The next morning, I got a call from Dana, the clerk who'd helped me pull the original HOA filings. "You were right to be suspicious," she said. "Turns out several of the board's annual filings were forged, the signatures for election certifications, falsified. I ran them through the county's document verification service. Not a single match, meaning she was never legally elected, not past the first term. After that, every extension was fabricated. Why didn't anyone catch it? Most HOAs operate on trust and voluntary compliance. No one checks unless someone makes noise. You made noise." I thanked her, hung up, and immediately emailed the ombudsman's office. If Cheryl's terms were never valid, then every action she took after that first term, including fines, property citations, and board votes, were null and void. 2 days later, the state took over the HOA's financial management. An interim trustee was appointed, a real estate attorney named Layla Monroe, with a reputation for cleaning up mismanaged community boards. She called me directly. "I reviewed your case file," she said. "What you did here, documenting everything, filing the right complaints, gathering statements, it made a difference. Most people don't go that far." "I didn't know it would go this far," I admitted. "Well, you forced a corrupt system into daylight. That counts for something." She told me Cheryl's trial was being fast-tracked due to the volume of evidence. Financial records, camera footage, the forged signatures, it was overwhelming. The county had enough to pursue charges for criminal misrepresentation, residential burglary, and wire fraud. Meanwhile, the mess she left behind was still unraveling. For one, the HOA's reserve fund was nearly empty. The landscaping company Cheryl had hired had been billing over twice the market rate, and none of the work was ever completed. The neighborhood's irrigation system hadn't been serviced in 2 years. The insurance premiums were overdue, and several residents had been hit with illegal enforcement fees for compliance inspections that never actually occurred. Ron, the retired plumber, discovered one such charge on his ledger, a $200 fine for unauthorized exterior plumbing modifications. He hadn't touched his sprinkler system in over a decade. The reform committee got to work immediately. Malik coordinated with the new trustee to audit every enforcement citation issued in the last 4 years. Evelyn started calling residents who'd moved away, tracking down anyone who might have been forced out by false violations or liens. The stories came pouring in. One woman, a single mother who'd lived on Birch Hollow Lane, had received escalating fines for non-standard decorative elements on her porch wind chimes and a garden gnome. She'd been threatened with legal action and eventually sold her home under duress. Cheryl had then personally recommended the buyer, a private investor who flipped the house within 6 months. Sounded suspicious. So we dug deeper. Turns out, Cheryl had been quietly brokering sales to a small group of investors in exchange for kickbacks. The buyers would come in, purchase a house from a resident overwhelmed by fines and legal threats, and then flip it at inflated prices after the HOA approved rapid renovations. We compiled names, cross-referenced sale dates, buyer entities, and board meeting notes. Nearly a dozen homes had changed hands under questionable pressure. The pattern was unmistakable. I brought the findings to Leela. "This is worse than we thought," she said, flipping through the files. "This goes beyond fraud. It's predatory displacement." The authorities agreed. The DA opened a second case, this time focused on coercion and unlawful transfer of residential property. If proven, Cheryl could face additional charges, and the investors involved might be forced to return profits or face civil penalties. The neighborhood, once divided and apathetic, rallied with a kind of energy I hadn't seen in years. People showed up to meetings. Volunteers helped clean up neglected common areas. The old board's rubber stamp culture was gone, replaced by open forums, transparent budgeting, and resident input. One evening, Malik and I stood in front of the now unlocked maintenance shed. The place had been thoroughly cleaned, re-inventoried, and fitted with a proper checkout system. "Hard to believe this little shed held the key to everything," he said. "It's not the shed," I said. "It's what happens when no one's watching." He nodded, then grinned. "Well, we're watching now." That weekend, the community held a small gathering, not an HOA event, just neighbors bringing food and folding chairs to the park. Kids ran around, someone brought a speaker and played old Motown tracks. No agenda, no speeches, just people reclaiming their neighborhood. As I sat under a tree, sipping a soda, I saw Evelyn laughing with a couple who'd just moved in. Ron was showing a group of kids how to fix a garden hose. Malik waved from across the lawn, holding a clipboard, but this time it was for a barbecue sign-up sheet. The damage Cheryl had done would take time to repair. But the roots were strong. And now, with her schemes exposed and her influence gone, Willow Creek felt like a community again. And me. I finally got my wrench back. The courtroom was packed. Not with reporters, this wasn't big enough to make the national news, but with neighbors. Dozens of them. Some stood in the back, arms folded, watching with narrowed eyes. Others, like Evelyn and Malik, sat shoulder to shoulder on the middle bench, leaning forward like the outcome might decide the fate of the neighborhood itself. I sat near the front, next to the assistant district attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Colleen Dorsey who didn't bother with pleasantries. She'd barely looked at me during our prep sessions, but I respected that. She was meticulous and she didn't like distractions. Across the aisle sat Cheryl, visibly smaller than usual. She wore a beige suit with shoulder pads that didn't quite line up with her frame and kept fidgeting with a legal pad she wasn't writing on. Her lawyer, a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, leaned toward her every few minutes to whisper something she clearly didn't want to hear. The judge, a gray-haired man with a permanent frown, called the room to order, and the trial began. It moved fast. Cheryl had waived her right to a jury, likely hoping a bench trial would feel less theatrical. It didn't. Colleen's opening statement was clinical but devastating. She laid out a timeline that started with unauthorized entry into my garage and expanded into a pattern of theft, falsified contracts, misuse of HOA funds, and fraudulent property transfers. She didn't embellish, didn't need to. When it was my turn to testify, I walked up, took the oath, and sat down. Cheryl didn't look at me once. Colleen kept her questions targeted. "When did you first notice items missing from your property?" "About 3 months before I installed the cameras." "Did you ever give anyone permission to enter your garage?" "No." "Did you recognize the person in the footage?" "Yes." "Who was it?" "Cheryl Lancaster." "Did she have a key?" "She used a copy of the old key that I'd since replaced." "Did you confront her?" "I did." "She was holding one of my tools at the time." "Did she deny taking anything?" "She claimed she was conducting an HOA inspection." Colleen nodded and moved on. She asked about the recovered items, the inventory from the maintenance shed, the ledger with rental notations. I answered everything directly. When Cheryl's attorney cross-examined me, he tried to suggest I had a personal vendetta. I cut that off quickly. I didn't even know about most of what she was doing until the police got involved. I just wanted my tools back. He pushed harder. "Isn't it possible that the items found in the shed were donated?" "No, I still had receipts for several of them. One had my initials engraved into the metal." He tried implying the camera footage had been edited. Colleen objected. The judge overruled it, but I answered anyway. "My security system uploads directly to a cloud server." The timestamps are verified. I gave full access to the police. Colleen gave a small nod and called her next witness. Malik took the stand after me. Then Ron. Then a contractor who admitted he'd accepted rented equipment from someone identifying herself as the HOA's operations director and had paid in cash to avoid paperwork. Evelyn testified about the missing items she hadn't even reported, which were later recovered. Then came Dana, the clerk from the records office, who confirmed the forged filings and missing election documents. The defense had almost nothing to work with. Cheryl never took the stand. Her lawyer called 2 witnesses, both former board members who claimed they'd known nothing about the theft or the financial manipulation. One of them buckled under cross-examination when Colleen produced an email he'd sent approving a payment to a vendor that didn't exist. The judge recessed overnight. The next day, he returned with his verdict, guilty on all counts: unlawful entry, residential burglary, fraudulent misrepresentation, misuse of community funds, property coercion. The judge didn't mince words. This was not an isolated lapse in judgment. This was a sustained abuse of trust, carried out under the guise of neighborhood oversight. The defendant used her position to financially exploit residents, manipulate records, and personally benefit from property seizures. Cheryl didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just stared straight ahead like the verdict wasn't real. Sentencing was scheduled for the following week. The court ordered restitution to be paid to affected residents, including me. The state froze her personal accounts. Her home, already under lien due to unpaid taxes and legal fees, was placed into receivership. The prosecutor's office told me that Cheryl was facing between 5 and 8 years, depending on the judge's discretion. It wasn't my decision, and I didn't care about the length. What mattered was that she couldn't hurt anyone else. After the verdict, people filed out of the courtroom slowly. No cheering, no celebration. Just a quiet, collective release of tension that had been building for far too long. Outside, Malik caught up to me near the steps. I still can't believe how deep it went. Neither can I. Evelyn joined us. Do you think she ever planned to stop? No, I said. I think she thought no one would ever challenge her. Well, Evelyn said, she was wrong. We stood there for a while, watching as people rejoined their families, got into their cars, and drove back to the homes they'd fought to protect back in Willow Creek. The changes were already visible. The interim trustee had worked with a local nonprofit to set up a community advisory board. No more unchecked power. No more closed-door decisions. The shed had been converted into a shared workspace where residents could borrow tools, check them out with a simple log, and return them when done. It wasn't just about function, it was about trust, slowly rebuilding itself piece by piece. I passed by the rec center one evening and saw Ron teaching a young couple how to rewire a light fixture. Malik was on the roof helping a volunteer crew replace a few damaged shingles. Evelyn had taken over organizing the community garden, which had doubled in size since spring. As for me, I finally felt like I could relax. I'd put my tools back where they belonged. Replaced the ones I hadn't recovered but labeled every last one. No more spare keys under flower pots. No more assuming that just because someone carried a clipboard, they had your best interest in mind. A week later, Cheryl was sentenced to 7 years in state prison. No chance of parole for at least 4. The court ordered her to repay over $38,000 in restitution, which would be managed through a state-supervised fund. Her personal accounts wouldn't cover all of it, but the restitution fund would help make up the difference for the victims. The investors she'd partnered with were slapped with civil penalties and barred from purchasing property in the county for 5 years. Several of them settled quickly, quietly, and expensively. The new HOA bylaws were ratified with overwhelming support. They included mandatory term limits, transparent budgeting, and a clause that required any board member to disclose personal or financial relationships with vendors. The neighborhood changed not just on paper but in spirit. People waved more often. Kids played out front again. Driveways were full of weekend projects and lawn chairs instead of surveillance and suspicion. One afternoon, I was in my garage door wide open, music playing, tightening a loose belt on my table saw when Evelyn stopped by. "Thought I'd find you here," she said, holding a cold soda. "Getting too quiet around here," I said. "I'll take quiet over clipboard tyranny any day." We both laughed. It felt good. Real. She looked around at the neatly organized shelves, the labeled bins, the pegboard with every tool in its place. "You ever think about joining the new board?" I shook my head. "I did my part. Time to let someone else take a turn. I'll be here if they need me," she nodded. "We're lucky you were." I watched her leave, the late afternoon sun catching the tops of the trees, casting long shadows across the freshly trimmed lawns. The breeze carried the sound of a hammer tapping from 2 houses down. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was honest. And it was ours again. The locks stayed changed. The cameras stayed online, but most importantly, the people had changed too. We stopped waiting for someone else to fix things and started doing it ourselves. And just like that, the garage that once held the first clue to a hidden scheme became the quiet heart of a neighborhood that finally remembered how to stand together.